Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mi beit avadim. I am the Eternal One, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. It is with these words that the 10 words, the Aseret Hadibrot, as they're called in Hebrew, begin. Not with a recognizable commandment, thou shalt not, but with a statement, a verse in which God, so to speak, introduces herself to Israel on Mount Sinai. Here God self-identifies and justifies a demand for faithfulness. It is because I took you out of Egypt that I reserve the right to your loyalty. A commentary to the second commandment, you shall have no other gods besides me, points out that this command of fidelity to only one God is unique in the ancient Near East. Texts from this period present a generally tolerant religious environment. The gods did not mind the worship of their peers as long as their own needs in the form of donations, precious goods, food and drink were not neglected. In a similar vein, the central affirmation of our faith in the liturgy, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Eternal One is our God, the Eternal God is one, does not, as Bernard Levinson points out in the Jewish Study Bible, make a quantitative argument about the number of deities, but a qualitative one about the nature of the relationship between God and Israel. Both texts, the Shema and the 10 Commandments, reflect a pre-monotheistic Israelite belief called monolatry, the allegiance to one God, while recognizing the existence of other deities. Last night at our Tikkun Leil Shavuot, the theme chosen for discussion and study was Shema, listen or hear, and this was interpreted through a wide range of discussions, events, and study sessions, including the time-honored session known as Rabbis at Midnight. This was an opportunity for participants to sit together in small groups and choose 1 or 2 texts to study together. Knowing the theme of the night study, I had been searching several weeks for a Tikkun Leil Shavuot study session that had been curated by Rabbi John Rayner, Zichrono Livracha, former senior rabbi of this synagogue. In the 1970s, I think it was, he resurrected the tradition practiced by the mystics of the 16th century of staying awake the whole night, a practice which is linked with the story that on the night the Torah was given, the Israelites fell asleep. The particular tikkun package of texts I was looking for was based on the first line of the Shema. I knew that I had a copy myself, but having moved house, I managed to mislay it. I asked Cindy, our archivist, if she had a copy. I asked the librarian at Leo Baeck College. I asked Bob Kirk. No one knew of it, let alone had a copy. But one last search in a box yielded success, and there it was, among other papers, a selection of Aggadic interpretations of the first verse of the Shema, a tour de force of commentaries on this short verse of just 6 words. Hear, O Israel, the Eternal One is our God, the Eternal God is one. The original Tikkun, this collection of commentaries, has 40 texts, and we would have studied it, and I remember studying it all the way through the night, from 9 or 9:30 all the way through till 5 a.m., sitting round a table in the Montefiore Hall, learning together. Its texts begin with a passage from the Mishnah. It includes a passage from the New Testament and a wide range of midrashic commentaries, not only elucidating the meaning of the Shema, but which use the verse in remarkably creative ways. The Talmud is included, of course, but also the mystical text of the Zohar, medieval versions of midrashim, philosophical works by Bachya ibn Pekuda of the 11th and 12th centuries, Maimonides, of course, as well as biblical commentaries from the Middle Ages and a later 19th century commentary to the Siddur, known as Avodat Yisrael, and 20th century writings that include Claude Montefiore. Each commentary tells a story or allows us to understand the Shema more deeply, differently. It interweaves the words of the Torah with the lives and longings of the generations that came afterwards, their observances, their beliefs and doubts, their philosophy, and every other aspect of their lives. One midrash comes from a collection of homilies called Pesikta Rabbati, written in the 9th century, possibly in Italy. It is one of a number of midrashim on the 10 Commandments and connects the 2 verses mentioned earlier, the Shema and the first commandment. The midrash is introduced with a parable. Once upon a time, there was a man who was a friend of the king, who knew the king's secrets. After a while, the king's friend was nearing his final days. The king said, "Come, and I shall reveal to you the secrets of the king." The man lifted his eyes and beheld the king. Thereupon he said, "My son, heed the honor of the king." Now the Midrash is going to compare this opening parable to the biblical story of Jacob approaching his death. In the same way, says the Midrash, Jacob called to his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the end of days." Then Jacob lifted his eyes and beheld the Holy One. Thereupon he said, "My children, heed the honor of the Holy One." What did they say in God's honor? Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel. Israel referring here to their father Jacob. The Eternal One is our God. The Eternal God is one. So they're saying to him, "Don't worry, Dad. God is our God. God is one." They address Jacob with those words. But then comes this extraordinary speech from Jacob to his sons. And remember, not all of his sons are particularly nice characters. And in his speech to his sons, he discloses his own secret sign to them, a kind of code whereby they'll know whether God is indeed their God or not. This is what he says to them. "My children, I give you this sign." With the word Anochi, which means I, God spoke to my grandfather. "I am the God of Abraham, your father, Anochi." And with this term, Anochi, I, God spoke to me. Anochi, I am the God of Bethel. And Anochi, I will go with you into Egypt. So he's saying to his sons, God addressed Abraham with the word Anochi, and he addressed me with the word Anochi, I. And so says Jacob to his sons, with you. If God comes and speaks to you with the term Anochi, know that God is your God. But if God does not, then God is not, kivyachol. If one dare say such a thing, God is not your God. So when the Israelites came before Mount Sinai, the story concludes now, and God began speaking to them with the word Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am the Eternal One, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. The children of Israel knew that he was their God. They'd received the code on Mount Sinai. I call this midrash an example of audacious midrashim, because it entertains the possibility that with that little word, kivyachol, so to speak, if one dare say such a thing, that the covenant made between God and Abraham, God and Jacob, might not have continued, that Jacob's descendants may have been unworthy to enter the covenant at Mount Sinai. And reading further into this midrash, I think it raises the question, to what extent are we, as Jews, bound to that covenant? And whose responsibility is it anyway? Is it God's responsibility to ensure that in each generation, God addresses the people with that word Anochi, creating a covenantal relationship of loyalty and steadfastness with us? Or is it our responsibility to ensure we are worthy to hear once again the words, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am the Eternal One, your God? In the aftermath of the Shoah, theologians argued that God's covenant had, so to speak, been abrogated, not by the Jewish people, but by God. God had withdrawn the divine presence and left us alone, the covenant shattered by the murder of 6 million, including 1.5 million children. And yet, as Yitzhak Greenberg argued, dialectical faith is still possible. We still reenact moments of faith, the exodus from Egypt, standing again at Sinai as we do today to receive God's revelation. We cannot today speak of a coercive covenant. If you receive the Torah, says God in the Talmud, holding the upturned mountain over the people, all will be well. If not, here will be your grave. A faith based on fear of what will happen if we do not believe, if we do not demonstrate our loyalty to the covenant, disappeared, even as far back as the rabbinic period following the destruction of the temple. God's presence had removed itself from among the people, and they and the sages among them had to find different ways to conceive of God's love, forgiveness, and blessing. Entering the covenant today is a voluntary act, both for born Jews and for Jews who have chosen to become part of our people. Being Jewish represents a willingness to hear the Anochi, the I of God, to seek that hidden God, a God who has withdrawn from our world. It falls upon us, says Greenberg, to assume a more responsible partnership in the covenant. This voluntary covenant requires us to step forward and live as Jews, to assume commitments, express certain beliefs, to still want to be Jewish, even after 6 million have died, simply because they were Jews. As liberal Jews, we take that step based on informed choice and recognition of the fluidity of our faith. The covenant is not something imposed from above by fiat. It emerges from our willingness to put our trust in the hidden God of our own age and to live our lives ethically and morally, embodying those ethics in our daily lives. As we stand again at Sinai, may we enter a partnership of co-creativity and assume our responsibility for the future of the Jewish people and of Judaism, and be mindful of the task that while we cannot complete the work of redemption, we are not at liberty to abstain from it. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin, v'hibatel mimena.